Hey guys, what's going on? Joe here with Excursion Cuts. I posted a video just a couple of days about the DJI Osmo Pocket, which I'm filming you with right now. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to pick it apart and just address some of the shortcomings with the camera. All cameras have them. This is not a big deal. I just want to kind of cover some tips and tricks that might help you when you're shooting with the DJI Osmo Pocket. Alright, it's a small camera, just like an action camera or your phone. And one of the shortcomings that we've all had to deal with over the years with phones like this is their very poor low light performance. So let's be real, I'm in a dark car right now, it's night. So the best advice I could offer you is to have supplemental lighting with you. Something like this, like the Aperture M9, this credit card size light can brighten up your scene quite a bit. Lume cubes are another good choice, provided that you gel them, because they do tend to have a bit of a daylight balance, magenta hue thing going on with them. But supplemental lighting is going to be your friend. Quick tip, if you don't have any supplemental lighting with you, you probably have your phone with you. So my tip would be to enable your flashlight prior to connecting the Osmo Pocket and launching the Wemo app. Now for extra credit, cut out and tape a gel across the LED bulb that is your flashlight on your phone, and you'll be able to warm up that flashlight a little bit. Most phones, even the high-end ones, have a bit of a cool, almost magenta color cast to them. Doesn't look super attractive. Obviously, if you put a CTO gel, which stands for color temperature orange, you're going to get something a little bit closer to human skin when you're filming yourself. All right, and last but not least, let's talk about camera settings. What can you do with the Osmo Pocket if you're shooting in low light, if you know you're going to be in a low light situation? So first things first, don't shoot in 4K 60 frames per second. Definitely don't shoot in slow-mo mode. Both of those are going to require higher shutter speeds, and higher shutter speeds result in a darker image. So the rule of thumb is that you want the number of your shutter speed to be double of your frame rate. So for example, if you're shooting at 4K 60 frames per second, that would mean you would want a shutter speed of 120 or 120th of a second. Conversely, if you're shooting with the slow-mo mode on the Osmo Pocket, that captures at 120 frames per second, which would mean you'd want a shutter speed of 240th of a second. That's not going to work in really any situation other than broad daylight. So what you want to do is go into Pro mode on your Osmo Pocket, set it to 24 frames per second, because then what you would want is a shutter speed of 50. It's supposed to be 48, but you would round it up to 50. So that's basically the lowest you can get with that shutter speed, which will give you a little bit brighter image. All right, well, what about situations when you actually want the image to be darker? Well, it's overexposed. Now, as I just mentioned with the shutter speed, the higher your shutter speed, the darker the image. So if you're in a situation where it's going to be difficult for you to control the amount of light, and you're ending up with an image that's overexposed, which is typical. Remember, you can't adjust the aperture on the Osmo Pocket. It's at a fixed aperture of f2.0, so that's pretty wide open all the time. So the one thing you can do to darken your image is buy attachment filters for it. There's ND, which stands for neutral density filters, and circular polarizer filters that you can get for the Osmo Pocket. In fact, I just ordered a kit. It hasn't arrived yet. I'll put a link in the description below, but they basically attach magnetically, and that will allow you to go out in broad daylight and not have to have your shutter speed too high. So for example, if you're shooting at 24 frames per second 4K, you may not want your shutter speed to be at 120th of a second. You may actually want that to be at a 50th of a second, which ND filters will allow you to do. Okay, little tip with audio. The onboard mic on the Osmo Pocket isn't horrible. It really isn't. Now, I know some of the YouTubers who had pre-production models of the Osmo Pocket dealt with some pretty sketchy sounding audio, but I think DJI released a firmware update prior to the production model shipping, and now it actually does sound pretty decent. For an onboard mic, and let's get to that. As long as it's close to your body, relatively close to you, and you're in a relatively controlled environment like a car. Cars are kind of natural sound booths, right? We've got upholstery on the ceiling, on the seats, and if your windows are rolled up, the car's parked. Even better if it was off. My car's actually on right now. That's going to be ideal. If you're in a room with carpet, beds, comforter sheets or whatever on your bed, curtains, that's going to help you out a lot more than if you were in an empty basketball court. So I'm actually taking a couple of trips to New York this year. This If I'm going to be doing any vlogging on that trip with this camera, it's going to have to be in the hotel room. Walking on the city streets in New York, there's a ton of noise pollution there. It's just not going to work. That's when I would have to rely heavily on a lav mic, which, again, if I mentioned in my last video, DJI are talking about releasing a USB-C to Mini 3.5 adapter, which would allow you to connect a lav mic to the unit. So if you caught my last video on my initial thoughts on the DJI OSMO Pocket, I did mention that it does have face tracking, which is a pretty slick feature. There is a downside to it. It does tend to place the face of your subject in the center of your frame, which kind of violates some of the fundamentals of shot composition. You may not want the head of your subject dead smack in the middle of your frame. So my tip here when shooting with the Osmo Pocket is compose to crop, meaning frame things a little bit wider than you think you may want them in post so that you do have the option of cropping in. Remember, this is a 4K file, so if you're cutting everything in a 1080p timeline, you can zoom in quite a bit. You can scale that image up quite a bit, reposition it so that you're kind of following things like the rule of thirds and that type of thing. All right, folks, a couple of quick tips that I thought might be handy to you when shooting with the DJI Osmo Pocket. Again, if you guys are new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I cover a lot of travel videography and travel photography on this channel. Definitely trying to grow it. Until next time, happy travels.